John Hook's Newsmaker Saturday starts now.
Thanks for joining us for Newsmaker Saturday. Should a student in Arizona who speaks Spanish or another native language be taught only in English? State Superintendent of Public Instruction, Republican Tom Horne, thinks so. He believes teaching kids English only gives the student the best chance to succeed in America, using a teaching concept known as English immersion. Back in 2000, Arizona voters passed Prop 203, requiring that English learners be taught only in English unless they obtain waivers. 63% of Arizona voters favored this idea. But it turns out some 26 school districts in the state are ignoring the law. Horne threatened to withhold funding from schools that offer dual language programs without a waiver. But Attorney General Chris Mays, a Democrat, recently issued a legal opinion saying that Horne doesn't have the authority to withhold funding from schools over this issue. Superintendent of Public Instruction Tom Horne joins me now on Newsmaker Saturday. I don't know if that set it up, but I think that's the long and short of it.
You're absolutely correct in every point.
Okay, thank you. Good to have you on the program, by the way.
It's great to be with you.
Arizona, to my knowledge, correct me if I'm wrong, is the only state in the nation where schools are required by state law to teach English learners only in English. Is that correct?
I don't know. I can tell you about Arizona. I don't know about the other states.
The question would be, are we on the cutting edge? Are we the vanguard? Or are we the outlier that maybe we need an adjustment?
Well, I'll give you the data that supports it. When I took office, they had bilingual education. Lisa Graham Keegan, who was one of my predecessors, had reported to the legislature that the proficiency rate of students becoming proficient in English in 1 year was a pathetic 4%. I instituted structured English immersion, and we got that rate up to 31%. At 31%, within a few years, everyone becomes proficient. At 4%, almost no one becomes proficient. And you can't succeed in the American economy without being proficient in English. And also you do better academically in the regular classrooms if you're proficient in English. Now, that's the reason for it. But there's also the law. The initiative states specifically that the instruction is in English. And interestingly, the Attorney General evaded that. She said she was not expressing an opinion on that. She was just saying that I didn't have the authority to enforce the law. Well, I'm the executive. I have to enforce the law. I'm bound by the law. So I think she was flat wrong by that. And it's clear that the law is that the instruction must be in English, as illustrated by the fact that even though she's being political and wants to appeal to a left-wing base, even she could not find an argument that it was okay to have dual language for students who are not proficient. She said she wasn't going to express an opinion about it, which is like wearing a T-shirt that says Horne is right and I'm wrong.
Okay, let me ask you about the 2019 law. Arizona legislature approved giving the state board more authority to adopt alternative programs. Governor Doug Ducey signed that bill, and I think it passed out of the Education Committee, predominantly Republican, 10-1. So they said you can tinker a little bit with this. Do you not agree?
No, the legislature does not have the power to violate a voter-protected initiative, and they didn't try to do that. They said that the state board should adopt models, but the legislature said nothing about having dual language. They just said that the state board can adopt models. The prior administration under Kathy Hoffman proposed as one of 4 models dual language. At least that was the title. If you try to read it, it's incomprehensible, but the title was dual language. And it passed the state board by exception, which means it didn't come up for discussion. It was just treated as a routine ministerial matter. So no one ever really thought about it other than my predecessor as superintendent. And admittedly, it passed, but you cannot contradict the initiative that was passed by the voters. In addition to that, what we are saying is, you can have dual language if you have waivers. Waivers would be that they have to be signed by the parents, and there have to be some conditions met, such as that the student is at least proficient in oral English. And initially, the executive director of the state board said that I wasn't contradicting the model because I said it was okay to have dual language as long as you had the waivers provided for in the initiative. and those waivers were an administrative matter that were up to me.
So you're okay with it if there are the waivers. You're not opposed to it necessarily as long as there is a waiver to teach
for example,
dual language.
There are about 3 or 4 different kinds of waivers. The first one is if the student is proficient in oral English and gets a signature of the parents. I'm all in favor of that, because if the student is proficient in oral English, the student can go to a regular classroom that's conducted in English, can understand what is going on, and learn the reading and writing aspect in the regular classroom.
Superintendent Horne, why are we arguing about this 20-some years after the voters passed it?
Yeah, I'll tell you exactly why. I have only one goal, and that is the academic success of these students. My opposition are ignoring the data, and they're governed by an ideology. And as between concern for the academic progress of the students and ideology, I think that your viewers would prefer that we proceed by what's best for the students and what's in conformance with the law.
What about some of the education advocates who say that when a kid, let's say, speaks primarily Spanish, they're really a Spanish speaker, they're trying to learn English, but while they're learning English, they're falling behind in math and science and other subjects because they're not taught in his native language.
Right.
So you lose them on other subjects other than just English. Does that carry water?
The answer is you have to make it up after they become proficient. They do learn some academics. You can teach subjects in English to English language learners by using the appropriate vocabulary. You can certainly teach math that way, and I've even seen lessons in history that way. But they do fall behind, and you have to make it up later. But there's a monumental study that was done in a magazine called Education Next, sponsored by Harvard and Stanford, that said that it's better to catch up on the academics later but become proficient in English quickly. And
why is that?
And let me just tell you that in every subject that they tested, the students that had been in English immersion did better in graduation rates, in admission to college, in average income, and in admission to high status professions. The students who had been in structured English immersion outperformed the students who had been in bilingual by almost 2 to 1. So the data shows that the students are much better off in the long run if they master English quickly and then move on to catch up with their academics.
So if we're going to take both of these issues, the voter approved Proposition 203 and the student performance, you're saying student performance is your overarching reason for...
That's my motivation. I'm obligated to follow the law, obviously.
Well, you've also got the Voter Protection Amendment passed that says you can't tinker with a voter-approved initiative.
That's exactly right. Nobody can violate a voter-protected initiative, and that's what this is.
So 203 is voter-protected, and
yes.
you can't, and no one else can tinker with it. Can the state
That's
Board
right,
of
and the Attorney General didn't try to. You know, she would have if she could have, but she couldn't find a way to say that dual language was consistent with the law. So she said, explicitly, if you look at her opinion, I'm refusing to express an opinion on that. All I'm saying is that Horne doesn't have the ability to enforce it. Well, I have to enforce it. I'm the superintendent of schools, and I have to do what's legal. I can't do what's not legal.
Where does it go from here?
To court.
Okay, and this is weird because obviously Chris Mays, as the state's attorney, represents all the department heads. She represents you, or typically would.
She's supposed to, but she never does. I got sued because I'm defending the state law that says that biological boys shouldn't be able to play in girls' sports. And they sued 4 defendants. The other 3 conceded that it was okay for boys to participate in girls' sports. So I was the only defendant that was defending it. The legislature was allowed to intervene only for purposes of the preliminary injunction. And so she was obligated to represent me. She claimed that she had a conflict of interest, but she did not have a conflict of interest. A cognizable conflict of interest would have been, for example, if she had represented one of the parties, which she had not. She disagreed with the law, and or she at least thought that disagreeing with the law would appeal to her left-wing constituency. So she refused to defend me, and so I had to get a lawyer and use education funds to pay for a lawyer to defend myself because she refused to defend me, and I think there'll be a lawsuit over that as well.
Right. I was going to ask you. I was going to ask you about all this. Where does this issue of transgender sports go now? I suspect this is another one that could go way up the court chain.
Well, this is a big national issue. I believe it'll go to the U.S. Supreme Court, and I have no doubt that we'll win in the U.S. Supreme Court. It's a terrible injustice. Girls who work really hard, hoping to make the varsity team or perhaps get a college scholarship or perhaps even hope for the Olympics. They work really hard. They excel in their sport. And then all of a sudden they come against biological boys who have bigger muscles, bigger bone structure, all the advantages that males have, and they can't compete. And they're devastated. Their dreams are shattered. It's a cosmic injustice, and I'm pledged to fight against it. You opened the
Empower hotline where people could complain about critical race theory and other things being taught in classrooms that they were concerned about. Apparently that's been flooded with crank calls. Is it still up and running, and how are you managing that?
It's still up and running. They did that because in Virginia, when they were flooded with crank calls, they disconnected it. But I'm a little more stick-to-itiveness about it, and we've just ignored the crank calls and focused on the legitimate ones. And so we have no problem. I have the tenacity to stick with it, which apparently they did not have in Virginia.
You've also, and you ran on this, you've greatly expanded the voucher program in Arizona. I think we've got out of 1.1 million students, I think we're up to about 60,000 now that are on the voucher program. I think that number is correct.
Your researcher deserves a gold star.
It's me. I'm the only researcher.
Getting all the numbers right.
The researcher is me, Superintendent.
Okay.
The question is, the cost is ballooning. You'd agree with that, right? And that means that there are people who want this. There is a market out there, and the argument has been that it's rich parents who are taking advantage of what ultimately is a tax break to do this. You're saying now that there are more lower income people starting to figure this all out, and they're taking advantage.
Yes, it got off to kind of an unintended start, which is that the people who were on top of it and knew about it were the people that students already in private school. So it was the $7,000 was a real cost to the state. But the trend is people of all economic levels, and that's the intent, that people of all economic levels should have the same choices that rich people have already had to find the best possible education for their children. And we're engaging in a major advertising program geared, weighted toward Spanish-speaking people and toward people in lower economic areas to make them aware. And what I say in that ad is that my job is to improve our already excellent public schools. But if the school is not serving one of your children properly, you do have choices.
Superintendent,
and that's for the first time that people without a lot of money have choices.
Would the legislature be wise to maybe cap income limits on who can take advantage of this if we truly want to help people who are in more struggling economic circumstances?
Well, it's my job as the superintendent to enforce the law that's passed by the legislature, and I'm not going to be telling them what to do. I have enough controversies on my plate.